Hello, and welcome to this panel called Nature is Calling, Invest in Biodiversity or Bust. But talking about nature-based solutions, music to my ears. Harry, you work across sectors. What are the biodiversity impacts that you see in all those puzzle pieces across the different sectors?
Yeah, thanks, Megan. And thanks, Jason. That's a nice framing of the value of biodiversity and nature underpinning what is really underpinning our global economy. I've worked in this space for almost 20 years now, from the nonprofit sector, the private sector, working with governments and the financial sector. And what I'd say is that in the recent years, and especially in the last 18 months through the pandemic, we've definitely seen biodiversity and nature more broadly rise as a significant issue and across sectors. So there was a time previously when I started my career when these themes were solely under the purview of the voluntary sector and public sector. It was something to deal with that philanthropy and government budgets could deal with the problem. And this was largely because of an assumption that nature didn't have a role to play in the global economy, either in its underlying value, as Jason just described, or in the risks that our activities impose upon nature and biodiversity. And this meant that the flows of capital markets treated nature as an externality, minimizing the pressures we placed on it and undervaluing the opportunities that nature offers. And we're seeing a shift in a positive direction. And that shift is largely because the reality is that biodiversity is in fact tremendously valuable and monetizable. And if we treat it poorly and continue to mismanage it, will erode the basis of natural capital. I want to expand a little bit on the WEF report that Jason mentioned. So to put a finer point on it, in terms of what the World Economic Forum research was showing, is that not less than half of global GDP is highly or moderately dependent on nature. Yet, and interestingly, what got me moving in the private sector on this notion is 10 years ago, the European Commission published a report talking about the amount of global GDP being spent actively destroying nature. And it was roughly the same amount, half of global GDP. So there's a mismatch here, right? Our economy is built on this notion that nature is important and integral, yet our activities are contributing to the demise of that natural capital. So other research has come out in the last couple of years. The Paulson report in late 2020 estimates that in order to sustain nature globally, we need just under $1 trillion annually. That's 900 billion. And look, that seems like a lot of money, but it amounts to less than 1% of global GDP. Plus, we're already spending a significant amount on biodiversity, roughly $150 billion a year. And we're spending a lot through government coffers on subsidizing perverse subsidies that erode natural capital as well. And if we shift those subsidies, roughly $300 billion a year, into positive incentives and investments for nature, then we can address that financial gap, which amounts to roughly 170 billion remaining that the private sector, financial sector, and others can contribute to natural capital. Speaking of governments, we're also seeing the role of nature in valuing sovereign bonds. Planet Tracker out of the UK is doing some tremendous work on evaluating the loss of natural capital on sovereign bond ratings and the risk of countries and emerging markets repaying their bond offerings. So all this means that there's an opportunity that nature is an underlying value that we need to maintain and invest in. And one thing that we often lose sight of is the fact that putting money to work for nature is sending money down a black hole, that we're just paying for stuff that's not going to return. The reality, though, is that there's investment opportunities and return of capital opportunities that can generate significant and clear value. So it's not necessarily a cost to organizations in a given sector, but an investment not only in your own organization's future, but the future prosperity of the planet.
Perfect. Thanks.